This brazen bully illegal administration doesn't even go through that pretense. And I think that should scare everybody, because their foreign policy is might makes right, and that's all that matters.
So I'm not scared. I don't think any American is scared about the consequences of this.
I care about the world, not just Americans.
No, I know, but you're also, in this instance, caring about a narco-terrorist group and government
no evidence
that supports
provided.
them. There's been no evidence showing that they're not actually drug boats that are being sent
That's not
here.
how this works.
We do.
Hey guys, I'm Mike, and in this video, we're taking a look at Emma Vigeland's return to CNN's Abby Phillip show, where she goes head-to-head with Scott Jennings, Jason Rantz, and the rest of the panel. We'll break down key clips from the episode and talk through how the exchanges unfolded, including the moments where tensions clearly flared. I've got some thoughts I want to share along the way. Before we dive in, please take a moment to subscribe. It really helps the channel.
CNN has exclusively learned that the CIA carried out a drone strike in Venezuela earlier this month. It is the first known U.S. attack inside the country. And sources tell CNN that the target appears to have been a remote dock on the coast. The administration believed that it was being used by the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua to store drugs and move them onto boats for shipping. No one was at the facility at the time that it was targeted, according to sources. The CIA declined to comment on this, and CNN has asked the White House and U.S. Special Operations Command for comment. Now, we all know this because, in part, an interview last week with President Trump where he said, quote, a big facility was wiped out, and he mentioned it again today, but he offered few details about the operation.
There was a major explosion in the dock area where they load the boats up with drugs. They load the boats up with drugs, so we hit all the boats, and now we hit the area. It's the implementation area. That's where they implement, and that is no longer around.
Now, the strike could significantly escalate tensions between the U.S. and the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, who Trump has said pretty explicitly should step down. But this new strike also raises new questions about whether an operation in Venezuela would need to have congressional approval. President Trump was asked about that earlier this month, and here's what he said.
Mr. President, will you be seeking any authorization from Congress for any land attacks on cartels in Venezuela?
For anyone?
For any land attacks on drug cartels in Venezuela?
I wouldn't mind telling him, but it's not a big deal. I don't have to tell him. It's been proven. But I wouldn't mind at all.
I'm joined at the table by Scott Jennings, Jamal Simmons, Rena Ninan, Emma Vigeland, and Jason Rantz. And Rena, let me start with you, because this is kind of where I think things seem to have been headed. Lots of questions tonight about why the CIA, not regular military forces which are in the region. But what does it tell you about how this is escalating and progressing?
You know, some of the language that's been used has been focused on whether the legal authority is there, what they're hitting exactly. You're hitting a foreign country on sovereign soil. You better be ready to expect the consequences on that. What's interesting is we've heard silence from the government there in Venezuela. What's also interesting is traditionally bombing is not the way people go after dealing with drug dealers and the drug industry in general. So this isn't a traditional route that they've gone about. But the biggest fear that I have looking at it from a foreign policy context is, remember, Russia and Iran still back Venezuela. So the fear is what could happen when you've got countries like Russia and Iran backing this country and the rest of Latin America also watching?
Well, I mean, it seems like the Trump administration is banking that nothing's going to happen, that nobody is going to respond. Maduro's not going to respond. Maduro's not going to want to provoke a direct conflict. But I wonder, do the American people, do they need some kind of explanation from this president?
I would hope so. I mean, when you look at the polling on this front, over 70% of Americans do not want a war with Venezuela, so it's deeply unpopular. Secondly, when you talk about the lack of legal authority here, Congress has the authority to declare war. That is what the founders wrote in the Constitution. Now, we broaden that authority with the authorizations for the use of military force after 9/11, but those are supposed to be pertaining to the response to 9/11 and to the Iraq War. They have not even provided an explanation, as you say, as to what authority they're even using, which makes it expressly illegal on its face. And so the consequences that you're talking about are incredibly dire. But I also just want to step back for a second and look at the justifications that they're even using. They're saying that these are narco-terrorists, et cetera. And that's the Republican line. But then Trump comes out and goes, it's for the oil. I mean, like when we did our illegal invasion of Iraq and killed hundreds of thousands of people there, at least the Bush administration had like the humility to pretend and go to the United Nations and say, oh, we're going to do this through the regular channels. I mean, this brazen bully illegal administration doesn't even go through that pretense. And I think that should scare everybody because their foreign policy is might makes right. And that's all that matters.
So I'm not scared. I don't think any American is scared about the consequences of this.
I care about the world, not just Americans.
No, I know, but you're also, in this instance, caring about a narco-terrorist group and government
no evidence
that supports
provided.
them. There's been no evidence showing that they're not actually drug boats that are being sent
That's not
here.
how this works.
We do know, as a matter of
I want to pause here for a moment because there's something important happening in this exchange that's worth calling out. On one hand, it's genuinely a positive development that Abby Phillip has MAVigeland on the panel more frequently. This is her second appearance in a short span, and she brings something that's often missing from these discussions: clear logic, factual grounding, and an understanding of how law and evidence are actually supposed to work. That matters, especially for an audience that's often exposed to a lot of heat, but not much light. But then you have someone sitting right next to her pushing an argument that completely collapses under basic scrutiny. Emma makes a straightforward point. There is no evidence to support the claim being made. The response she gets is essentially, well, there's no evidence that it isn't true. That's not how law works. That's not how due process works. And that's not how a serious country is supposed to operate. If you apply that logic consistently, the implications are disturbing. Under that standard, anyone could be accused of anything at any time, with no proof required. The burden of evidence is flipped on its head. Instead of the accuser having to prove a claim, the accused is treated as guilty unless they can somehow prove a negative. That's exactly the kind of thinking the legal system was designed to prevent. And this is where the broader issue comes into focus. There's been a normalization, especially in MAGA media spaces, of treating the absence of evidence as irrelevant. If a claim feels politically useful, it's treated as valid. If it reinforces a preferred narrative, it doesn't need to be proven. And when that mindset comes from the top, from an administration that has repeatedly tested, ignored, or outright broken legal norms, it trickles down into the commentary ecosystem. Now, it's true that there hasn't been nearly enough institutional or legal accountability to fully push back against this kind of behavior. There has been some resistance, but not at the scale many people hoped for. And whether meaningful accountability ever arrives remains an open question. But Emma's point is still crucial. Laws exist for a reason. Many of them were written by the United States itself, including international standards designed to protect Americans, soldiers, and civilians from exactly this kind of lawless reasoning. That's why having someone like Emma Vigeland on the panel actually matters. She's not there to inflame the conversation. She's there to remind people that evidence, legality, and standards still exist, or at least they're supposed to. Without that pushback, these discussions turn into pure propaganda loops, where claims don't need to be true, they just need to be repeated. And that contrast between evidence-based argument and narrative-driven assertion is really what this moment exposes.
the fact that this is a country that very clearly does engage in narco-terrorism and is a hub for sending to this country cocaine primarily, meth, which is the second leading cause of drug overdose deaths, at least where I'm from. So the average person, yeah, if you have a deep dive conversation about the legal aspects here, they're going to roll their eyes. That's just the reality. It might be important, and it is important.
But
they roll their eyes because they know who the target is.
The Sacklers are...
Donald Trump is putting you in a position
where
you're now defending drug dealers. Whether or not that's your intent, that's how it comes off.
Do you think that the Sacklers should be executed in the town square?
I don't think this is the town square, and I don't think that this is a declaration
what
of
does it
war.
matter? I mean,
as we've heard specifically tonight, this was an empty facility, no deaths, and I would assume that this was leaked to CNN with this information that came from the CIA, that if it wasn't actually a drug distribution center, a port, probably would have come out too.
But we killed dozens of people already under this pretense, so do you defend
We killed dozens of people who were on drug boats bringing drugs to this country to kill Americans.
Did the Sacklers help kill Americans with the opioid epidemic, yes or no?
So that is a completely separate issue. But
How is it separate? Should they be executed in the town square without any legal process? And that's what you're saying.
Who's next on the drug cartel here?
I don't know why.
Do we go to China as well? Do we go to other countries as well?
We should do things
how far
in the
are we
best
going to go on this?
interests of the
How
American
hard
people.
and how long can they continue going without Congress getting involved?
That is a fair point if we were targeting specifically China. But
and what's the evidence?
Venezuela?
What's the evidence here that there's change?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the other question is, what is the goal here? Is Trump just trying to make a point? Is he taking out one facility here, a couple of, drug smugglers there? Where is this leading us? Is he actually dismantling anything, or is he just dropping bombs to make a show out of it? That's the other part of this conversation where there have been no answers to that, Scott.
Well, I think they have multiple goals. It makes sense to me that if you were going to go to the trouble of bombing drug boats, and that if you found out where the dock is, where they load the boats, you might also bomb the dock. That makes sense to me. But I think they have multiple goals. One is to go after the narco-terrorists. That's a stated goal. I think they have broad political support for that. I think the administration would love to see Maduro go away. I know this because the president says it on almost a daily basis. And so I think they have multiple goals, but it all falls within the rubric of we're going to be policing the Western Hemisphere. Regarding Congress, I do think, I don't know whether they've briefed Congress on this specific attack or not. They've been very accessible to Congress on the Venezuela issue. Some of the briefings they've given have leaked, some have not. But my suspicion is that if they haven't briefed them on it, they will, because they've never really said no to any kind of congressional inquiry, particularly in classified settings when it comes to Venezuela.
When you pull back, what has me concerned here is the contrast between what we're seeing today and foreign policy. So on one side, you've got the president talking about leaning into blowing up drug boats, blowing up docks in Venezuela. We're really going into this 1823 Monroe Doctrine style American foreign policy. On the other hand, you've got what's happening in Europe, and you've got the president sort of taking Vladimir Putin's word for what happened with drone strikes on his home against the man that we say is our ally, who's Zelensky, right? And so are we pulling out of our commitments in Europe, which are the historic commitments since World War II that have kept peace in the world, and going and leaning into this policing of the Western Hemisphere, which takes us back to kind of a colonialist style American foreign policy? That's what really has me worried. And I think if we're thinking about what's going to make America safer over the course of the next generation, we ought to be thinking about the alliances that really do matter in the world. And I think some of those alliances are in Europe, and they've been with friends who've been able to help us keep the peace.
Yeah. If this is about regime change, it never ends well. If you look at U.S. foreign policy
and
history.
particularly in this region. I mean, it's not like we don't have a long history
It did pretty well after World War II.
trying to stop drugs from coming into the country by engaging in this kind of what they call the drug war, but also in trying to pick and choose leaders in Latin America.
That's exactly
Trump
right.
seems to be going back to that, and that part was a spectacular failure in the last 50 years, 60 years in this hemisphere.
But so part of me thinks that's two separate issues. On the one hand, I agree with your general take here, right? I do think that there is the risk of the chaos that comes with regime change. That is always the case. But on the one hand, I'm hearing people upset that he's not going too hard after Putin, but now you're also upset he's going too hard after Maduro.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't. Well, here's the thing. I mean, look. Maduro has no friends, right? Everybody would like to see him.
They're aligned with Russia.
And I'm talking about in the United States. There are very few people who wouldn't mind to see him go. I don't think that's really the issue. I mean, first of all, there's a transparency issue. But I think the other thing is, what is the actual strategy here? And if the drug part of this is being used as a pretense, then maybe that should be unveiled to the American people so they really know what we're doing, because it's not just that they're taking drones and they're dropping bombs. Mm-hmm. We have now a lot of military assets in the region. We have personnel. We have people who are children, sons and daughters of American citizens now in the region. Don't they deserve answers about what Trump is getting them into?
So, no, not entirely. We generally should not be putting out our complete strategy in dealing with our adversaries.
So if Trump is engaging in military actions that could lead to armed conflict, at what point should the American people be part of that conversation?
When we get to the point where he's actually declaring war or about to declare war. That's generally how this works. I think
he can't declare war
as
as Emily pointed out, he can't, or Emma pointed out, he can't declare war.
Yeah, he's not
So
declaring war.
that's the other part of this. So when is Congress going to be involved in that conversation?
When it gets to the point where they need to be involved. And again, they are part of the conversation. You have Democrats who are not supportive of this strategy, clearly, and you have Republicans who are. There's a debate that's going on that the American people are a part of, but I think we can all at least say reasonably here at this table is there may be some drug dealers and drug smugglers who are saying to themselves that maybe we should not be sending drugs into this country because we might get bombed.
Here's the point.
Well,
Let's assume that they're all guilty.
75% of the drugs don't come from that route, I'm not really sure that you're really making a dent in it. I mean, the Pacific, where they just had another strike today, that's another place where this has happened. But again, I don't know. I mean, it sounds like you guys are acknowledging this isn't really about the drugs. It's about
it is about the drugs.
Then why did Trump say it's about the oil? I mean,
and about Maduro, and about regime change.
I have the quote down.
And
we
why
want
did he
it
let
back
another drug dealer go?
on the oil.
I mean,
why would he say that then?
They clearly believe. First of all, we don't even recognize Maduro as a legitimate government.
Scott, why would he say it's about the oil?
Because we believe they have illegally engaged in trafficking oil around the hemisphere that's under sanction or whatever. Again,
we are
the overarching strategy
jurisdiction.
is we are the overriding authority in the Western Hemisphere. That is our view. It's about drugs. Maybe it's about oil that's under sanction. Maybe it's about the fact there's an illegitimate thug in charge of a country, and we don't want him in charge of it. It can be all of those things. But the reality is we're the big player in the hemisphere, and we're not going to let these people do whatever they want.
Let's hit pause.
Okay, so let's pause here for a moment because Scott Jennings begins talking about regime change, and Abby Phillip briefly alludes to it as well. If we look back over the last 50 or 60 years, how often has US-led regime change actually worked out well? The historical record on that question is, at best, deeply questionable. Scott Jennings also frames the United States as the self-appointed authority in the region, and as emmavigeland correctly points out, we don't actually have jurisdiction there. His response is essentially, well, there's a bad actor in charge. But here's the obvious question. Couldn't other countries say the same thing about the United States? Of course they could. And Scott Jennings would strongly object to that characterization, especially if it were applied to Donald Trump. Emmavigeland also makes another crucial point. The American people do not want this war. And when Abby Phillip asks Jason Rantz when the American people get a say, his response is that they'll be informed once it's officially a war. That statement alone says a lot. It reflects an attitude not just within this administration, but among many politicians that public opinion is secondary, even though they are supposed to work for the people. This administration, in particular, appears comfortable acting regardless of public opposition. Scott Jennings and others continue to claim Trump has a broad mandate, yet approval ratings are hovering around the mid-30 seconds, with roughly 2/3 of the country opposing much of what he's doing. I would argue that a strong majority of Americans would also oppose a war with Venezuela. What's especially telling is that these commentators can't seem to agree on what this conflict would even be about. Scott Jennings claims it's about drugs. Emmavigeland pushes back on that. Trump says it's about oil. And instead of reconciling those contradictions, Jennings simply avoids them while maintaining the same level of confidence. So I want to hear from you. If the United States ends up in a war with Venezuela, which, frankly, is starting to feel more plausible, do you think that's justified? Do you agree with Jason Rantz that the public only gets a say after a war has already begun? And do you think there's credible evidence supporting Scott Jennings' claim about Venezuela being a primary source of drugs? Evidence should matter, especially when the consequences are this serious. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And while you're down there, tell us where you're watching from. It's always great to see people from around the world sharing perspectives here. If you agree with Emmavigeland and Abby Phillip pushing back and asking tough questions, make sure to hit like and subscribe. I'm Mike, and I'll see you in the next one.